Hi, I'm Lhadon, and this is Our Nation, news and analysis on the state of Tibet. Today is Thursday, March the 5th, and I'm coming to you from Hong Kong, where there's been a terrific storm outside, so it's a little dark in here. Apologies for that. Also, apologies that Tendor is not with us, or with me again today. He will be back on, I promise, but for now, we're still having some long-distance technical difficulties. Anyway, so straight to the news of the day. New York Times has another article by Ed Wong, filed from Machu in eastern Tibet, 50 years after revolt clamped down on Tibetans. Also, Tibet chief rules out big problems during the anniversaries. Tibet chief being, well, there's two they're talking about. Champa Phuntsho, who is the Tibetan governor, as well as Zhang Qingle, who is the Tibetan Autonomous Region Party Secretary. The Tibet Party chief says Dalai Lama will fail if he makes trouble again. Grand celebrations are planned for Surf Emancipation Day. And Xinhua announces Tibetan Barbie girl says hi to the world. And no, that is not an Onion headline or a joke. That is for real. Okay, straight to this New York Times piece by Ed Wong. 50 years after revolt clamped down on Tibetans from Machu. Enraged nomads stormed through this windswept town on the Tibetan plateau a year ago this month, raiding a police compound, setting fire to squad cars, and forcing police officers to flee. To the north, Tibetans on horseback galloped into a schoolyard, ripped down a Chinese flag, and hoisted a Tibetan one, shouting, "Free Tibet." Now the authorities have imposed an unofficial state of martial law on the vast highlands where ethnic Tibetans live, with thousands of troops occupying areas they fear could erupt in renewed rioting on a momentous anniversary next week. And Beijing is determined to keep foreigners from seeing the mass deployment. And so he goes on to describe this mass deployment of troops all over the region. He was, I gather from this article, detained by the police for about 20 hours. And in his detention, they seem to have taken him through some hot spots. And some of them even admitted to him, the Tibetan ethnic situation is very serious, said a paramilitary officer. Tibetans are causing trouble. This is an extremely sensitive time. He also actually talks about how they were stopped by People's Armed Police, PAP, the Chinese paramilitary force. They were stopped by a People's Armed Police Force unit that was based in Beijing and that had actually guarded the Bird's Nest Stadium during the Olympics. And they have been sent to this area last month, and their mission included keeping foreigners out of the area. He points out that foreigners aren't supposed to get any kind of special permission to travel in this region. Of course, this is the area outside of the Tibetan Autonomous Region, areas that have been absorbed into China's Qinghai, Sichuan, Gansu, and Yunnan provinces. So, you know, he's clearly able to see what's going on there and how China is locking down and sealing not just the Tibetan Autonomous Region, but the entire Tibetan Plateau and Tibetan areas off from the outside world, so no one will know what happens. And it's good to notice, or to see how he points out that the broad security measures undercut assertions by the Chinese government that serious ethnic tensions do not exist and that Tibetan nationalism is not widespread. They also show that Tibet remains one of the most sensitive political and security issues for China, though one that remains invisible in the developed cities along the country's east coast. He uses some of the numbers that we haven't actually really seen many people use. He talks about that, you know, the Chinese government says this many people died. In the ensuing crackdown, you know, Tibetan government in exile says at least 220 Tibetans were killed, nearly 1,300 injured, and nearly 7,000 detained or imprisoned. He has one woman talking about in Labrang or Shahe, the Chinese say, "The security forces are everywhere, on every corner, day and night," said a Tibetan woman reached by telephone. "Don't come here." He also describes circular sandbag emplacements in Hejo, overseen by half a dozen officers, resembling a scene in a war zone. And at the same time quotes the local Tibetan official saying, "There's no ethnic conflict here. Look in the streets. Everything is peaceful here. The Chinese, Tibetan, and Hui people all get along." So clearly two different pictures presented, one by a foreign journalist who can see with his own eyes the military deployment and the incredible lockdown that's going on, in Tibet and Tibetan areas, or what China calls Tibetan areas of Chinese provinces. At the same time, Tibetan government officials working for the Chinese, party, the Chinese party officials, all in denial, and of course counting on the fact that Tibet will remain under lockdown and no one will be able to see or hear what really goes on there in the coming days and weeks as we approach not just March 10th, but this serfs' emancipation day on March 28th that China's declared. Reuters has a piece that just came out. Tibet chief rules out big problems during anniversaries. Champa Punzo, the Tibetan governor of the TAR, there won't be any big problems, he says. Common people everywhere are very calm and very confident in the government and the party. Everyone feels that way. He also, there's also Zhang Qingli, who's the head of the Tibetan Autonomous Region, is also quoted as saying, that everything will be fine in Tibet and that the Dalai Lama and his supporters in their attempt to split China are doomed to fail. And he goes on to say, the Dalai Lama has never stopped making trouble, even for one day since the incident, so last year's uprising. He has visited some countries selling his ideas, which indeed contain the splitting motive in different forms. So, clearly there's no change in approach or position from the hardliners, Zhang Qingli being one of them. He's the party secretary in the TAR who came to Tibet at the end of 2005. He came from Xinjiang, or East Turkestan, where he was notorious for his ideological zeal and the way that he helped, bring millions of Chinese settlers into workers and farmers and settlers into Xinjiang or East Turkestan and essentially just swamp the people and rule with an iron fist. And there's ICT did this Tibet at a turning point after last year's uprisings, and they chronicle, this came out I think in June, they chronicle all of the different protests, they record as much information as they can about where and when the protests happened and who was involved and what areas of Tibet were hot spots. They also do this little background on the TAR party secretary Zhang Qingli, who of course is right now, all of this is coming out of the National People's Congress that just started, the Chinese parliament that just started sitting today in Beijing. And so he was addressing that Congress. Zhang Qingli is responsible for this recent sort of crackdown and hard line in Tibet. He's always attacking the Dalai Lama. Zhang's frequent and hostile rhetoric against the Dalai Lama, whom he has described as, quote, the biggest obstacle hindering Tibetan Buddhism from establishing normal order. He's also described the Dalai Lama as a wolf in monk's clothes, a devil with a human face. So that's just a little idea of who Zhang Qingli is. Anyway, so no real change from Beijing, or no change at all, and even just a harder line. And I think this goes with this whole theme that's coming out of China. It's been there for a long time, but this whole idea, especially with the economic situation in the world, the party and the Chinese government leaders just continuing on this line of ensure stability, ensure stability, ensure stability, and while reassuring the Chinese that China will be fine and they will weather this economic storm. They're admitting this could be the worst year in the past century in China, and at the same time saying, but we must ensure stability and we must deal with this ethnic issue in Tibet. So all sorts of contradictions here. There is no problem, there is a problem. There is nothing to worry about, there is something to worry about. Clearly they don't have their minds made up. And then just quickly, it is true that they are planning a big celebration in not just Beijing but Lhasa, according to an article just out of China, on March 28th to mark serfs' emancipation day. So there will definitely be a provocation there. And Tibetan Barbie Girl says hi to the world. This is 300 Tibetan Barbie dolls, just been released. The ethnic doll is called Fushi Girl, meaning lucky and happy girl. And I think we all know what that's about. And just if you live in Europe, you can rest assured they will be available to you, these dolls, in the near future. Anyway, that's Our Nation, news and analysis on the state of Tibet. I'm Lhadon from Hong Kong.